Whether you're thinking about a potential career in cybersecurity, fresh out of college and actively pursuing your first cyber job, or seeking a career pivot, today I'll be sharing my recommendations on how to get your first job in cybersecurity. First things first, interest. You need to be interested in cybersecurity in order to succeed in the field. My interest came from my exposure to a family member of mine who worked in cybersecurity. I saw the kind of life that he was living and the things that he did in his day-to-day job, and I didn't know what else to do in my life, so I just kind of leached on to the idea that I was going to work in cybersecurity long term. And I didn't have a good plan or a framework built around this idea, I just relentlessly pursued. For some people that will work, but I would highly recommend that you actually have an interest in the field and find ways to maintain that interest over time. The next most important thing is going to be your education. What I would recommend is that you read books or magazines on the topic of cybersecurity and technology as a whole to help you maintain that interest in cyber and to build a solid collective technical understanding of how technology really works. Back before I officially began working in cybersecurity, some of the things that I would read would be 2600 magazine, which is full of all kinds of personal anecdotes and stories from people who write into the magazine, and it centers around primarily older technologies and certain techniques for hacking. It's very interesting and it gives you exposure to kind of that old-timey kind of cultural understanding of how technology was in the past. I would also read biographies or autobiographies on certain people. One that I always recommend to pretty much anybody, whether they're into cybersecurity or just technology in general or sometimes not at all, would be Ghost in the Wires by Kevin Mitnick. Kevin Mitnick is basically known as the greatest hacker of all time. Most people who are part of the cyber community, if you can call it that, would acknowledge that. And I'm not going to spoil it, but basically he's a master social engineer. Speaking of that, I also recommend reading books on the topic of social engineering and other niche topics in cyber as well. A specific example that I can give is called Social Engineering: The Science of Human Hacking by Chris Hadnagy. It's a non-technical book, but it does go into detail about how social engineering works, and it gives you exposure into the types of cyber careers that revolve around social engineering. It's very interesting. It's a niche field, and I would say that's probably the hardest field to get into outside of maybe pen testing. I would recommend reading a little bit about coding or programming. You don't have to go too far in depth because a lot of what cybersecurity deals with from day to day is policy or governance related work that doesn't go too deep into the weeds with programming, but you do get that exposure to programming from time to time, especially with AI tools making programming such an accessible thing to regular everyday people. So one book that I could recommend on that topic is called The Self-Taught Programmer by Corey Althoff. It's a fantastic book and it will teach you the basics of Python. And one final recommendation that I'll make on reading material would be that you can actually read books that are study guides for exams. You don't always have to take the exam, but reading the study guide will give you very in-depth knowledge and information that somebody who is taking the exam would also have. So for example, one book that I've read cover to cover would be the Certified Ethical Hacker Exam Study Guide, which is around 600 pages and it's fairly non-technical, but it does give you a lot of background into the different tactics, techniques, and procedures that attackers will use. And a lot of the terminology found in that book is familiar, but there will be a lot of specific attack types that you've probably never heard of. I think that each of those examples that I just gave is something that I was reading before I even got into cybersecurity. I would say I read something like 20 books before I got into cybersecurity, so by the time I got into it, I was fairly competent anytime that I was presented with cyber terminology. I was familiar already with a lot of the jargon and a lot of the concepts. I would highly recommend seeking out that type of competency before you get into cybersecurity because otherwise it can be overwhelming. A more official type of education that you can put on your resume would obviously be something like a degree that you can get from a school. My opinion on college education is that you don't necessarily need it, but it will help you quite a bit. And that also might depend on the level of education that you have. For example, if you have an associate's degree, it does give you an advantage over someone that only has a high school diploma or a GED, something like that. Because an associate's degree is an official, provable record of the level of education that you have achieved. The same is true for someone that has a bachelor's degree. They might be able to advance in their career more quickly than someone with an associate's degree, or they may qualify for other roles that someone with an associate's degree does not qualify for. So someone that has a bachelor's degree might be able to go straight from college into a cyber role, whereas somebody with a lesser degree or no degree at all might have to find an alternate path, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Generally, I would say you don't need a master's degree, and you certainly don't need a PhD to get into cybersecurity. Those are nice to haves, and those are completely up to you later in your career if that's something that you would like to achieve. But I think for the sake of getting into cybersecurity or some other highly technical IT role, I would recommend getting at least an associate's degree, but you don't need it. And the reason that I say that is because, in my opinion, certifications are king for getting your foot in the door. If you look at a lot of the cyber roles that are out there on the market, most of them have a minimum requirement that needs to be met. A lot of the time, it's a combination of having a degree and a certain certification. One of the most common certifications that you can earn that will meet that requirement is called Security Plus by CompTIA. It's probably the most commonly held certification in the entire field, and that's not because it's easy, it's just because it meets that minimum requirement that so many roles have. When I took Security Plus, I believe it took me 3 months of studying something like 5 hours per day. I was a terrible student in school, and I just wasn't sure how I would do on the exam, so I kind of went overkill on the studying. But I did pass the exam on my first try, and that, in my opinion, is the most important certification exam that I have ever passed, and I've passed 5 of them. On top of Security Plus, I would recommend having at least one other certification. It can be security related, but it can also come from a different discipline. A few that I would recommend right off the bat would be things like Network Plus and Cloud Plus, also from CompTIA. And it is 2026, so Security AI Plus or Sec AI Plus from CompTIA would probably be another great one to have, although that one is a little bit more specialized, and so you may need to have a higher level of competency before you can take that exam. So again, having 1 or 2 certifications, especially if you don't have a degree, is going to be your ticket in the door. Those are minimum level requirements that you need to have before you get into the field, and so they won't guarantee you a high paycheck, but if you can get your foot in the door and then start building experience, you can start earning higher paying roles from then on. The next and perhaps most obvious helper to get into cybersecurity, or any tech role for that matter, is going to be your experience level. If you're just coming out of high school, companies will assume that you don't have any experience whatsoever, and that may not be true. You may have a little bit of experience from a class in school, or maybe some things that you did at home on the home computer. Maybe you have your own laptop and you've done all kinds of labs. Maybe you've done all kinds of study that you just can't prove that you have a certain level of competency. But having experience is very valuable because it proves that not only can you do something, but you have done it before. I did mention before that someone that has a bachelor's degree or higher may find it easier to go straight from school into a cyber role. That is something that I had attempted to do, but I was unsuccessful in. So I'm just going to tell you how I did it. First of all, you have to get experience in IT in some form or fashion. If you've never worked a help desk or tech support type of role before, the only way that I can explain it is that it is high volume, high stress, low reward. That much was true for me. I can't say that's true for everyone. There are a lot of people that do work in tech support and they find it fulfilling and they enjoy it. And a lot of the experience there is that you get tickets and you process those tickets. You solve issues all day, every day. And in help desk and tech support, the volume of work is typically very high. You're going to be closing anywhere between 20 and 100 tickets, depending on the size of your organization, per week. However, I did that type of work for about 5 years. And in my 5 years of help desk / tech support / field tech support, I had learned so many things that made my transition into cybersecurity a lot easier. There are things that I was able to do when I worked in technical support that I couldn't even do today, and that I certainly wouldn't be able to explain today if I saw someone else do it, which is funny because at one point I was the one doing those things. But what you pick up on is a lot of the little niche technical details, especially about the operating systems that you're dealing with and about the hardware that you're dealing with. You may also have to do things that are not technical technical or even IT related at all whenever you're doing a tech support type of role. If any percentage of your time is spent doing field tech type of work where you go to the user, what you'll find is that you will end up doing things like cable management. You'll lay under a desk and string up some cables, which has nothing to do with cybersecurity. But that is the sacrifice that you make in order to gain experience and to be able to put that on your resume and to build a reputation. I'm saying all this because that is the experience that I had. I had transitioned from school straight into an intern role, actually an unpaid internship, which is something you should also be willing to do if you're able to go without pay for a period of time. As an unpaid intern, I had worked very hard and proven myself, and I was hired on full time. And from there, again, it was 5 years of working in tech support and reading all these books, the ones that I mentioned and many others, as well as earning a couple of certifications before I eventually got my foot in the door. Regarding certifications, I did have 2 whenever I was ready to make my transition from tech support into cybersecurity. I had Security Plus, which I mentioned before, and I also had a Cybersecurity Analyst Plus, which is another CompTIA exam. And I've mentioned that organization so many times, I have to say CompTIA is fantastic for the fundamentals and the basics of technology. If you're looking to get into a certain field, pick up a study guide for whichever field you're trying to get into. If you want to be a network engineer, grab Network Plus book. If you want to get into cloud, get Cloud Plus. If you're trying to support Linux systems, get Linux Plus. They have a fundamental exam and study guide for just about anything that you can think of. So this isn't an official endorsement, but rather from my experience, I have learned a lot from the reading material that company publishes. While you're gaining your experience in your help desk role, your tech support role, or whatever, you may also consider, if your end goal is to get into cybersecurity, it would help you compete against the market if you did have real experience in other fields as well. So you may consider help desk a stepping stone, and then maybe a different type of role a stepping stone if your end goal is to get into cybersecurity. So for example, I mentioned just a moment ago, if you wanted to be a network engineer, maybe take the Network Plus exam. If you do that, then maybe you can go get a junior network engineering role, something like that, and then you can add that onto your resume. So you would have tech support and then you would have network engineering. Those things will help you compete against other people that are trying to get cyber roles. And that's very important because the market is extremely competitive today. Even people with experience in cybersecurity are having a hard time getting into other cyber roles because the competition is so high that you just have to find every little way to get you in the door over someone else. When you feel like you're about ready to start targeting specific roles, what I recommend is that you research companies that have a high volume of roles in cybersecurity. Companies that might have a lot of cybersecurity roles would be larger organizations, maybe an organization of 10,000 plus people, or security companies themselves. There are a lot of security product vendors that have a lot of support roles that are specialized in their products. They might have 4 or 5 people dedicated to a certain customer. Those 4 or 5 people each have a role, so that's 5 roles right there. You're looking to fill a security role, so you target a company that would have a handful of those roles available that you could compete for. In regards to large organizations, it would help to live in or near a big city as well, but you don't have to, especially if you can pull off getting a remote or work from home role. If you're looking for a remote opportunity or work from home role, I would highly recommend that you lean into certifications. Once you find the company that has the role that you would like to work in, the next step for you, again, it may be a stepping stone, but the next step for you would be to get hired for a role that you qualify for at that company that you'd like to work for in their cyber department. Even if it means investing a few more years into the job that maybe you don't want or you don't enjoy anymore. Again, it's a stepping stone. It's the sacrifice that you need to make if you really want to accomplish your goal of getting into cybersecurity. This is probably the part that people will like the least. After you've earned trust and built a reputation within the organization and enough people know you and you feel like you're ready to make the transition, then you can start looking at internal roles, specifically those that are within cybersecurity, or if there's another part of the organization that you would like to work in, maybe you lost interest in cybersecurity, look for internal roles that would accomplish that goal for you. This is exactly what I did. It's important to note that having a reputation and people knowing who you are does not guarantee anything. So the next most important thing about all of this is having patience and persistence. You can apply for a role and get an interview and not get that role. That has happened to me before. That may not happen only once. It may happen a handful of times. It's very important to have a certain level of patience and understanding that you are competing against a lot of people that want that same job, and most of the people that are going to be applying to those jobs that are considered for them will have prior experience. That's where patience comes in, and persistence. You exercise patience when you're rejected, and you exercise your persistence when you keep applying anyway. It may be necessary to take a role that you don't necessarily want, but it gets you closer to the one that you really want. Let's say there's a cyber operations role that's open and you're not really interested in that. You might want to do something else like e-discovery or maybe risk management, but there's maybe a SOC role or the cyber operations type of role that's available. So you go after that one. You get that role, you apply for it, you interview for it, and you get it. Maybe you love it. It might be similar to your tech support role, but it's going to center around cybersecurity in general. So it gets you closer to your end goal than continuing to work in a help desk or tech support capacity. Consider each role a stepping stone and always try to have the end goal in mind. One last piece of advice. Before you begin your pursuit, try to know what type of cyber role you would like to have so that all of the time and effort that you put into your studying, your certifications, the reading material that you invest in, it all will lean into your end goal, which is a specific type of job in cybersecurity. Before I got into cyber, I didn't know that there were niche areas of the field. I always just thought of cybersecurity as being cybersecurity. So for me, it was really simple. I just wanted to get into any cybersecurity role, and I'm happy to say that I was able to pull that off. But once you get into cybersecurity, then you start to get exposure to other fields, and you start to think, maybe I'd be interested in this over this. So that's just part of the stepping stone process. You find a new end goal and you work towards it over time. You can basically employ everything that I've mentioned before into each pursuit for an end goal that you have, whether you're moving from a certain type of cyber role into another, or if you're pivoting into a different part of the industry in general. I hope all these tips have been helpful for you. Most of them have been written off of my own personal experience and what I did to get into cybersecurity myself, so I know that they work. And if you happen to be in cybersecurity and you had a different path to getting in, drop it in the comments. Let someone know how you did it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.